Ha ha! This is Lord Zed, and you're listening to the Grawlix Podcast. Listen carefully. You will be tested at the end of the show. Lord Zed, signing off.
All right, listener, bear with us just a couple minutes, and then you will get good audio. We had an issue. Till then, here's the intro with the less good audio. This is Randy. In the future, clown technology.
This is Melanie. And in the future, energy shortages will drive the world to such desperate measures that we will build a Megamaid to siphon the gases from Jupiter for fuel.
And this is Jesse. In the future, when you go to the comic book shop and you check out your pull list, it's actually a polling booth. And you have to vote for the comic that you get, just like this podcast.
All right, this is Dave. And in the future, squid will advance a lot faster and evolve faster than humans ever will. So H.P. Lovecraft was always right, kids. Worship your tentacled overlords.
We're joined today by a special guest, Dave. I don't know if he wants his last name out, so I'll just introduce him as Dave.
Hi, guys.
Dave was on the second episode of This Podcast is Haunted that we put out around in October last year.
Right.
And he's definitely he's a dog. Okay, so you've read some comics. You like horror movies, old time radio plays, and pulp novels and pulp I guess anti-heroes?
Pulp Fiction without, anyone from Saturday Night Fever. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your comics habits. Did you used to read? Are you currently reading? What kind of comics do you enjoy?
Right now, I get more into indie comics than anything else. I've really been enjoying the stuff that Dynamite's been putting out in Boom Studios. I started out on DC, so I've always got a nice rosy spot for them in my heart. Read Marvel. I've been reading since, fourth grade, easily. That was really what got me going, and I've been going strong ever since. I really like the old Dark Horse run in the 90s with like the Catalyst comics and so forth. I know a lot of people weren't big on their take of the superhero genre, but I always had fun with that. And I was a guy who was getting into like the initial Hellboys and Concretes when those were first coming up back in the, late 80s, early 90s from Dark Horse, early Mask. So I really enjoyed that too.
So we'll talk a little bit about our poll list pick, Bring on the Bad Guys. And even though you haven't read that, I figure you could probably jump in because much like the stories, this conversation will just kind of be generic in general.
Yeah.
It sounds great.
Do we know what our next... Oh, wait, we still have half. So...
Our next poll list pick will be Marvel Bring on the Bad Guys.
That's right.
We'll talk about chapters 1 through 3 today, covering the origin of Dr. Doom, of the origin of Dormammu?
The Dread Dormammu.
Okay. And
I
then
suppose everyone has their own pronunciation for it.
Yeah. And then wrapping up with Loki. And then next month we'll talk about Red Skull and so forth. The rest of the origin stories in that graphic novel.
Okay, well,
I apologize for all of the dogs and motorcycles in our neighborhood.
Clowns.
Motorcycle dog clowns? Holy crap.
They're demanding spray-on products.
Oh.
Wow.
So
it's a nice day, so they're out in full force.
Sure. Well, it's okay. You guys sound so much better now.
Yeah.
I don't mind if you've got a Harley gang rolling down the street. It sounds way better.
We do.
It's a little problematic for us.
We're comic book readers. We don't want to get roughed up.
Well, first I want to jump to Jesse because you have more history with this book than we do.
Oh, yeah. This was one of those books where we found it in a thrift shop in Tekamah, Nebraska. We would go to Tekamah, Nebraska to get piano lessons. And so once in a while we'd get to stop at the gas station and get a treat afterwards. Or we would, get to go to the was that Video Express was at
Yep.
was the video store in Takema, and that's kind of where they were based out of. So we'd rent a movie, and sometimes we would hit like the antique shops or thrift stores, which they were kind of like hand in hand. And Bring On the Bad Guys, first edition by Stan Lee, was there, and so we did read it cover to cover several times. But I haven't read it in a long time, and so when this came up on the pull list, I thought, I sure could use a copy of that in my library. So, yeah. But funny thing is, it was kind of hard to track down because those first editions with the cover that everyone kind of knows are going for a pretty penny. Mm-hmm. And so I finally tracked down one of like the second or third or whatever printings, and that was a little bit more affordable, but it was not as easy to find. Mm-hmm. The old ones were easier to find.
I don't know how rare it is, but it's definitely not an easy book to come across.
No.
You've got to search out.
They're all reprints, but they're hard to find.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chapter 1 covers Dr. Doom. It's got something like 4-part story or 6-part story. It's got basically 2 story arcs. Mm-hmm. Each one busted into several chapters. It's written by Stan Lee with art by Jack Kirby. Also some other people, I believe. Got to pull up my phone. Joe Sinnott, John Byrne, and Jerry Ordway. And yeah, this is Dr. Doom and the Fantastic Four, Origins of Dr. Doom. What did you guys think of this?
It was fun. I mean, it was probably out of this first half the hardest to get through because it was the longest by far. I mean, like the other 2 together were probably not as long as the 2 Doctor Doom stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kind of difficult to.
It had me really worried about getting through even just the 3 chapters, because the Fantastic Four stuff for me started off really rough, but it starts with a much earlier story. It's like the very first appearance, I believe, of Doctor Doom.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's slow and old school. Like it was kind of rough. But it picked up for me as I went along. And like you said, it is quite a bit longer than the other chapters that we read this month. So after I got through that and then blew through the second chapter, I was like, okay, this might not be so bad. But I was a little worried. The very first part particularly, I was like, wow, yeah, this is old school comic book storytelling. For me, kind of problematic. It was just it was rough. It was rough.
It's cheesy.
Well, it's not how comics are written anymore.
Yeah.
Back then, it's called the Marvel method of writing comics, and what would happen is Jack Kirby would do the art. They would figure out the story. Mm-hmm. They would hand it off to Jack Kirby. He would do the art, and then they would have bubbles ready for Stan to go ahead and put the wording into. And so it's kind of a strange, almost backwards way of writing a comic. And so it becomes Stan sometimes being overly verbose, which, he's never had a problem with.
Well, and I think that plays into part of my issue with it is that you would see what's happening in the art, and then you would read the speech balloon, the word balloon, and it would tell you what's happening in the art.
Yeah.
And right. I'm like, I don't need the characters to tell me what's happening. I can see it. But, I mean, I've read a lot of pretty old comics, so I understand the older style storytelling. It even goes back to, as a modern reader, it feels like talking down to the audience. But I've also got to keep in mind, when I was reading through this, I had to keep in mind, kids were the primary audience for these comics. So there is a little bit of like, well, maybe they won't get what's happening, so let's also tell them what's happening. Yeah, it's a little jarring now, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and everything's so explained in those bubbles. I mean, you're reading their thoughts. And we do that in modern comics, but not to the level that it used to be.
Yeah.
Like, you always knew what Captain America's thinking before he's about ready to throw his shield. It's like, I think I might need to bounce my shield off of the wall. And instead of the art just showing us him doing that, he's thinking it out in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, aha! I knew that trick would work.
Yeah.
Against the Nazis.
And older movies, I mean, it's not just comics, though. Older movies would do the same thing, where they would just, it seemed they were overly cautious to make sure the audience understood what was happening.
Maybe we're just smarter than people used to be.
I don't know.
Well, no,
I don't think that's the problem.
the theory with films, for example, in this same context, is that now a lot of movies, there's quick cuts and they don't need to explain everything, and you don't necessarily need the scene completely laid out with every shot. Like, you kind of get it. If you see an establishing shot, pretty much anything that's going to happen after that's probably somewhere in that scene. And they say that since film's been around so long, people have learned the language of film and that we get it. But earlier audiences didn't know this language of film, so it had to be much slower and this and that. And I don't know if that's valid, but it's kind of the same style of storytelling in these comics.
Right.
Which is a bit slower, and here's what's happening, and in case you didn't catch it, we're going to tell you.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking the same thing, just in a different way, in that everything kind of everything refers back, and this was innovative for its time. It was the first time, like, we've never seen anything like Doctor Doom. We've never seen anything like Spider-Man. We've never seen anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suppose that does bear a little bit more explanation. And now this is all old hat. We know what a superhero origin or even a supervillain origin is like. So we don't need it told to us in an overly informational way.
Beyond this first section of the first Fantastic Four story in here, because each, like I said, the first story itself is divided into chapters as it was, like, published back when. After they get kidnapped, essentially, by Dr. Doom, or he throws the net over the building or whatever that it is that's happening.
That's in the second story, right?
I thought that was the first one.
No, the first one, he traps Sue Storm and holds her hostage and makes them go back in time.
Yeah. But he gets her because he throws, like, this net over the building and then commands her to come out.
Okay.
That first part is the part I really had trouble. Now, even though it's part of the same story, after that, when they went back into time, I started to get more on board. It was a little goofy, but it was fun.
Right.
I enjoyed the Thing being dressed up as a pirate. Like, that's, like, what's happening. So I started to enjoy it more, even though it's still the same story, still the same storytelling style.
It's because pirates are fun.
So for the listeners that maybe are just jumping in and haven't read the story,
Thank you.
Fantastic, the Fantastic Four. First of all, the building, they get captured, and then he takes Sue Storm hostage and forces the male members of the Fantastic Four to go back in time and acquire the treasure of Blackbeard. And they don't know why. They don't know why they have to go get this, other than that's what Dr. Doom wants in return for Sue Storm's safe return. And, it becomes clear that the treasure has powers that Dr. Doom wants to tap into. Mm-hmm. And we also get a little bit of backstory where Reed Richards just kind of explains to us who Dr. Doom is. We don't know too much beyond the fact that they went to school together and he was doing weird experiments kind of thing.
Which is convenient that they went to school together, so.
Well, that's an easy way of, like, here's why Reed Richards knows this.
Yeah, no, but it just makes me think of Venture Brothers, and all the superheroes went to the same college apparently, and supervillains.
Right.
Well, and they pulled that directly from this because what was his name?
No, I still I read this whole thing and I still couldn't remember Dr. Doom, which is simple enough, but I kept calling him Baron von Underbite because that's what was in my head.
Because he totally is. He's got his own country. They all went to college together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not having read this, but being very familiar with Venture Brothers, I was pretty entertained by that. Just like, oh, okay, this is where they got that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, knowing that, it almost makes Venture Brothers even more funny, I think, is when they nod back to this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize, I mean, there's Venture Brothers has obvious, like, they have their own version of the Fantastic Four, and I know they pull a lot from superhero stuff, but I didn't realize that early on in the Venture Brothers they were pulling that much from superhero comics as opposed to, like, Johnny Quest and, like, the old spy cartoons.
Yeah.
So that was, a fun revelation. So then we get a fun twist with this whole pirate Blackbeard thing.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that the Blackbeard was the thing.
And he doesn't want to go back either. He likes it. Like, he likes the respect of being Blackbeard better than being the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, they kind of get into a dire situation and the thing doesn't want to go back. And really, the thing kind of does a despicable thing at this point because were they going to make the other ones walk the plank or were they just sending them off in a boat?
I think they were going to send them off in a boat.
Okay, that's not so bad.
Well, still, I mean,
And then and then there was a storm out of nowhere, a very convenient storm.
Yeah, that threw me off. I read it and then I'm like, do we have all of this here? Because it's like, things are happening, there's a storm, and then, but nothing really about it besides a sudden storm, and then it's done. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, they didn't really get into that very much, but whatever, it's convenient, and it solves the problem we're having right now.
It was a hurry up, we need to, like, this is a fun idea, but we need to hurry up and put the 4 back together so we can send them back.
The 3.
So,
and apparently all it takes is a storm to make Ben Grimm apologize. Like, I'm sorry, guys.
Yep.
The hurricane really taught me a lesson.
Oh, something I did want to mention before we get too far out of the story. In the very first part, something that I was very entertained by is the Thing is reading a comic book of the Incredible Hulk.
Oh, yeah.
And is it Johnny Storm? Is that the Human Torch? He says that he kind of reminds him of the Thing, and then they kind of get into a fight, which is fun. But I was very amused by that, and it was also kind of a jab at the Hulk, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So now I was flipping through it. I did not read it, but just looking at it, it looked like the Human Torch actually burnt the Thing in this.
Yeah.
So they're still trying to establish the limits of their powers at this point, too, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so.
I think in later editions, it's fire doesn't bother him.
That, or did he burn the comic book?
Well, he did that a little
I remember
too.
him.
Yeah, I think the Thing was yelling "ow" though, and so that's what hit me as interesting because you have the Rocky hided. Well, I guess we're still back in Lumpy Thing, aren't we?
Lumpy Thing.
He's not Rocky yet.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I mean, it's pretty early. Dr. Doom takes them back, pulls them back forward through time. They've done a little switcheroo with the treasure and thwarted Dr. Doom's plan, and that's pretty much that first story.
They do mention what is their aquatic nemesis? I don't know what his name is.
Submariner or
yeah. That what if he gets a hold of those? And I'm like, I wonder if that comes into play because I've never.
Oh, surely not.
Oh yeah, because the magical treasure that Dr. Doom was ended up being scattered along the ocean floor.
Yeah.
I like that their plan was let's just take this out and put chains in the.
Yeah.
I mean, the plan was flawed to begin with, so.
But it worked, so whatever.
It's Dr. Doom.
Rather than try to find the treasure in the present day like Submariner could do, let's send them back in time because that's easier.
Yeah, Doom's plan was kind of convoluted, and but that's classic villain, classic villainy. What was the next story? Because I think this is the one I enjoyed quite a bit more.
It started at whatever the castle or whatever it is that Von Doom has.
Latveria.
We get the origin, or we kind of get the explanation of so is this the case where Dr. Doom is dead and it's just been basically robots or new Dr. Dooms that he's kind of brainwashed?
Yeah, it's Doombots are running the castle, or as far as we know, that in the previous, either the previous issue or the previous story with Dr. Doom, he's supposedly killed in the course of the battle or the story.
Mhm.
And then this is where it picks up back up is the Doombots are enacting his like fail-safe plan. In the case of my death, you will do this.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually, here we get a more fleshed out Doom origin.
Yeah.
It actually goes back to, like, you see a younger Doctor Doom. Well, I imagine they didn't call him Doctor Doom at that point,
Yeah.
but also kind of told in an interesting way where it's not necessarily just a flashback. You get these flashbacks by way of the Doom bots brainwashing the next chosen Doctor Doom, this young kid who basically the idea is they reprogram his brain so that it becomes the actual next Doctor Doom.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of interesting. Remember.
They're not very original though. The device was called the Remembrancer.
The Remembrancer.
And I'm like, really, you can't come up with anything better than that. But I liked that the robots, when they weren't together or with him, thought they were Doctor Doom.
Until they're around other robots.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're programmed to think they're actually Doctor Doom when there's no other robots present.
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Then they go back and the kid gets to see Doctor Doom's life up to that point, which is all kind of strange anyway. I mean, I don't know. I don't really go to other countries to know what it's like, but it seems still very medieval.
Well,
His childhood for being part of the, such a sciencey comic book.
Well, it is weird that, because he, they lives in there's this, they have a castle and, the country, they live in this place with a castle, not like, England where there's old castles laying around, but like the castle is like their main, capital type thing. And the story does feel like
you could clean up your country. You've got too many castles laying around. Just leave these castles laying all over the floor for people to step on.
Well, and it is kind of weird because then he has a strong focus on magic. But then when he goes to college, it's like, modern day American college. You go there and it was strange. I know what you're getting at.
Yeah, like in his homeland, it was, they got chased off or whatever, him and his dad. And then he runs off with gypsies because apparently they were gypsies and his mom was a gypsy witch, which is how he gets into the magical stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's
a little all over the place.
Yeah. And then it steps into modern day at State U, which apparently is the best school in the world. And I'm like, really, a state university is the best in the world? That's nice. And then, using science apparently to study magic or try to figure more out. Which
is interesting, but it really just kind of thrown it together. So that brings us to kind of the little flashback part that we got in the first story that Reed Richards had recalled. Now we can talk a little bit about the art later or now or whenever, but I like the art, but I must say, so he puts his head in this device, it explodes, and his face is horribly scarred to the point where he feels he must have this iron mask seared to his face. Mm-hmm. But when they show, his scar, it's really not that bad.
No.
It's like a scar along his cheek and stuff. And he's like, I'm hideous. No one should lay eyes on me. And I was like, the art doesn't really convey that.
Yeah, but he's kind of a drama queen, He's like, oh, they were bad to my...
Dr. Drama Queen to you.
Yeah. He's like, oh, they were mean to me and my family, so the world must pay,
So this is where entitlement comes from. Let's make it really political.
It's all Dr. Doom.
It's all Dr. Doom.
And the kid catches a little bit of that, Well,
so the kid who's being remembered or remembranced. Yeah, basically the Dr. Doom, arrogance kicks in before the programming finishes. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, this is enough. He's like, I know what to do before all the memories had been put into him.
Well, so. To be fair, we've all been through pointless training videos. And
good point. That is very much how it seems. Yeah, he's like, okay, enough of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get it. I'm Dr. Doom.
Yeah.
Maybe about the 500th. Remember, he just got tired of it.
But I must say, okay, he was very arrogant and lazy because he's like, okay, now I'm Dr. Doom, and I'm going to go back and do something that I already did once before.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want to really have to try. I'm just going to do it, and I'll do it better this time. That's it.
Haven't you thought, though, that most good villains should go back and try it again? Because it's usually just one little thing that throws off the plan most of the time.
Well, and that is kind of
It's like that Wile E. Coyote syndrome, you know? If he just went back and tried it just a little bit harder, he'd have Roadrunner next day.
Maybe, but once you've done it once, you know, people are better equipped to deal with it, too. You lost the element of surprise.
I don't know. He's dealing with a team that wanted to go to piracy pretty quick.
That's true.
But
So I think he's got this one covered if he just went back and tried something again.
They did touch on it, though, because that was part of his reasoning for doing it again, is that, well, last time he was working with so-and-so, and he got double-crossed, or whatever he says.
So he remembered?
Well, he remembered. Yes, he remembered that much. Apparently, he didn't remember enough to know exactly, like, why his plan was not a good idea, I guess. I don't know. But I thought it was interesting that that was part of what was throwing the Fantastic Four off, is that he had already tried that plan, and they're like, it couldn't be Doom. He's already done this. He wouldn't do it again.
Even though it's kind of working.
Yeah. I mean, he destroyed their, I don't know what they call it. Is that?
The Baxter Building?
Sure.
At that time?
I have a question about that because I have not read I haven't read actually any of these comics. This is all that I've read of any of them. Is that their building and their building alone? Because otherwise, a lot of people died.
I think they have the top floors of that.
Yeah.
Right.
But they've set up, like, the security and all that, because isn't, like, the security guard downstairs and, like, the receptionist that reads androids?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if is it Herbie?
Herbie came in because they didn't want kids setting themselves on fire. That's where that came in, with the animated series in the 60s.
Well, I know the security guard stepped out, but other than that, I don't know.
Well, I got the impression, I don't know if they said it, but I got the impression there was nobody else in the building.
Okay.
Because it seemed like an after-hours thing. Apparently, Reed and... Apparently, they live up there?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we got She-Hulk. Comes in with... Oh, what's the guy's name?
Red guy.
What?
Red guy.
Red guy.
Comes
I don't know.
in with him. So I got the impression that there was nobody else there, but that might just be me making assumptions. Also, worth noting, the Thing apparently seems prone to telling the Fantastic Four to take a leap and go do his own thing. Because at this point, he's gone.
He went to go be a pirate.
And we have basically She-Hulk taking the Thing's place. You know, super strong. Not as irritable, though.
Which is strange, because she's a woman. I'm just sorry.
It's okay for you to say it, I guess. You're wrong.
What?
I got to do my part.
Well, they really play into, like, race issues
Yeah.
before his plot even unfolds, and that, that's laying out a story that comes after this, but...
Yeah, the shocking N-word lovers sign.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. I mean, they're putting forth a, like, anti-racism stance in the comic, but it was just weird to see racism portrayed in the comic book. We wouldn't even necessarily get that strong of a portrayal of racism in most modern mainstream comics. So I was really surprised to see that.
Well, I mean, I guess they used the N-word, but the guy himself that you meet seems like the happiest racist I've ever seen. He's, like, super cheerful.
It's true.
Aren't you tired of all those dour ones, you mean?
Well,
it's kind of like the happy Westboro Baptists,
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Hey, you're heathens and you're going to hell. Period. But,
No, yeah, this kid had a message of hate, and he was very happy to spread it. Yeah, it was very strange. And then that whole, obviously that's a plot that ties into stuff that's not in this book, later stories.
And Johnny Storm gets a little violent.
Oh, yeah.
Posters.
He gets very angry.
He's a little bit of a hothead. Well,
How long have you been sitting on that one?
no, I just thought of it.
Off the cuff, guys.
I can't wait till we get to the second part.
He learned it in State U.
I guess we've taken a lot longer on this Fantastic Four than I expected. But then again, it took a lot longer to get through the
It's
fences.
okay. The other sections will be much more low key.
Wow. Wow. That's pro level.
Learned it at State, folks.
Yeah.
So then we basically, they launch, Doom, or this kid, Doom, launches, the Fantastic Four's tower into space, blows up the tower, and they're floating around in space. Which was actually kind of cool because, well, I was like, well, they're not dead. But they also look like they're floating around in space. It was surprising to see the little kid floating out there. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
what's happening here?
And this is where I really appreciated it because they actually explain it all. And I'm like, I don't want to see another one where a superhero goes into space in a spacesuit, and then at the end they're flying around in a car with nothing on. You know? No explanations, no nothing.
What are you referencing?
It sounds a little bit like heavy metal. No, I get your point though. I mean, you threw the car in there, which is
No, it was Batman.
Now I got Sammy Hagar going through my head. Dang. I'm in heavy metal.
the worry was like you've got these superheroes who shouldn't be able to withstand space floating around in space. Turns out, luckily, Sue Storm's powers also include this force field thing.
By now they've learned to use their powers because she can shape that stuff any way she needs to.
This was my favorite part, though, because, yeah, their whole plan on, like, getting out of space
Surviving in space.
back into Earth from space.
Surviving in space and then re-entry was like, they're lucky she was there, or...
Well, and the Human Torch, too.
Yeah. I enjoyed that quite a bit because not that it would necessarily, they're superpowers, but not that it necessarily holds up to science, but they treated it very like, they're like, well, I need you to do this, and then of course there's going to be the heat issue, so we need, the Human Torch to absorb the heat. Like, I liked that, and this is a case in which he needed to explain what's happening because they're in an invisible bubble, so if somebody's not explaining what's happening, they're just floating there. But this was fun. I enjoyed, like, him being like, here's what we need to do, and it was all sounded very legit. Yeah, I thought that was cool. That was my favorite part of everything we've read so far.
Yeah.
So, do we like Dr. Doom?
I like Baron von Underbite, and that kind of makes me like Dr. Doom a little more.
I like the robots because they crash land, or they don't crash, well, kind of crash land into the castle when they come back. And the kid is just like, nope, it's not possible. I'm right, and that's just how it is. And all these robots are like, yeah, we're like totally screwed because this guy is a little, you know? I mean, they don't say that, but that's what they're Is that you need a Grawlix?
No, I think I need a Grawlix.
Oh, okay.
Doom branded with irony.
Sassy Doom bots. Like,
Yeah.
this guy.
Yeah.
This kid Doom. Oh.
Yeah, this impatient, overconfident little bad word is basically screwing us all, and we can't do anything about it because we have to follow his orders.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel bad for the robots.
I think that's fair.
And since they're robots, they can be destroyed in all manner of creative ways that you couldn't do to a human in one of these comics.
Yep. And they do destroy them in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this last story. Everyone's powers got used pretty interestingly. Well, Sue's and the Human Torch's powers got used interestingly.
Reed like shapes himself into a spaceship, and then she fits the bubble to the Reed spaceship, and then like the only one that was kind of lame until the end was She-Hulk. It was like, well, until we have robots to break, and what's the chances of that? Just hang out, She-Hulk.
Yeah.
It's kind of true.
And Red Guy.
Red Guy. Is that Wonder Man? I was trying to figure out who that was, but I didn't know if Wonder Man and She-Hulk had a thing or not.
To answer your question on whether we like Dr. Doom, I think his backstory is interesting because it's very colorful. Like, there's a lot of strange things in there. He's kind of the ruler of this country. He lives in a castle. He's big on science and magic, and he looks kind of awesome.
And he's spawned from gypsies.
And And when he decides to have this mask put on his face, of course, for whatever reason, he's got to have it right as it's pulled out of the being forged or whatever, so it's red hot, and then puts it on his face so it sears to his face. That's kind of hardcore. I appreciated that.
Yeah.
It's heavy metal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's his problem. I bet there's nothing to do in that town, and he was cheesing it a little too much.
Cheesing it?
And,
Yes.
In summary, I enjoyed the second story quite a bit. It was still a little long in parts. Dr. Doom's, like I said, is kind of interesting because he's a colorful kind of villain. He looks cool. His personality sucks.
yeah.
Because he's just angry.
He speaks in the third person.
Yeah.
Even his robots have that problem.
So yeah, that's my feelings.
Yep.
Spoilers on the other two chapters. This was, even though it was long and kind of rough to get through in parts, this was my favorite of the stuff that we read, I think.
Yeah, me too. Probably mostly because of the spacey stuff.
Okay.
Even the intro to the whole thing done by Stan Lee, like each part has a little intro. The intros were also longer for Dr. Doom because it was basically two stories, and he really had to get into, what he liked about it. He even talked about how he really loves the use of alliteration, which becomes real apparent when you're dealing with Dr. Doom and Dread Dormammu, and apparently that's a trick he used quite often. The hoary hosts of Haggoth.
I did not read any of that. I explained earlier when we weren't recording that my phone, because I read most of my comics on my phone, was not cooperating, so I didn't read any of the intros to the characters, well, the main intro or the intros to the different characters. So I worried that I was missing things, and I probably am, but someday I'll go back and read it. I don't know.
He basically just kind of gave a little, here's what we were thinking when we invented the Fantastic Four. Excelsior.
He was thinking, that guy drew something good, I'm going to make up a story for it.
Yes.
So now you say it, what's his name?
The Dread Dormammu.
The Dread Dormammu, which makes me think of a walrus for some reason.
I say Dormammu.
I say Dormammu. He says Dormammu.
Let's call the whole thing off.
Yeah.
save the drama for your Dormammu.
Is this the first Doctor Strange comics that you guys have read?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's worth mentioning, written by Stan Lee, art by Steve Ditko.
I do have a Doctor Strange animated show on my Netflix that I haven't watched yet, but I'll get to it.
Yeah, this is the first Doctor Strange stuff I've read. This was rough for me.
It's definitely unlike any of the other stories.
Yeah. Well, besides the fact that they just use language in a way I'm not used to. Once he goes into the, the realm of...
This other dimension?
Yeah. You're watching him walk through a bunch of shapes and shoot lights and say, incantations that make no sense to us. So I'm just going to take his word for it that this stuff is happening, because as far as I know, it's just him, hallucinating. There's, nothing that you can see to really...
Okay, that's totally my problem with it. And I'm probably doing an injustice to the story here. But the quick synopsis is... the dreaded Dormammu has challenged Doctor Strange's mentor?
Yes, the ancient
one.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sends Strange Ops to go deal with him. Mm-hmm. And that's there you go. There's the setup.
Yep.
I didn't mind the art, except that it was I like some of the strange things, like the shapes and stuff, but I was not, for the most part, wild about the look of this dimension that was beyond description. It really was just kind of some strange shapes in a lot of white space. Mm-hmm. But yeah, my main beef was, the story was, he comes across some creature, rambles some, blah, 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 shines a light at him. The creature runs away, and you're like, okay, well, this is just going to happen again and again. I guess this is exciting. Mm-hmm.
Sorcerer Supreme flashlight.
I mean, yeah. It did. I'm not that it was totally nonsensical. It just like you got no sense of like what was really happening.
Mm-hmm. You know, they need to do their magic, like Avatar style, where they have to do like some karate moves first and then shoot it out at them. Add a little excitement in there or something.
Well, and it's probably me not knowing the character well enough, but it's like, I don't know this guy's limitations, if he has any. I don't know if him doing these things is a challenge. I didn't know if there was any challenge or real stakes other than the fact that the dread Dormammu was a big bad who could kill him or destroy him or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like,
I think it
didn't seem like a challenge. He'd just come across this guy and be like, blah, 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 and fight over and let's keep walking. That's my beef.
From what I understood, after he fought the Ancient One, Dormammu was going to take over the Earth or whatever, so that's why he had to go and fight him, because the Ancient One was ancient and couldn't do it. Otherwise, then they're invading some other places, some other world and being bad guys. And good guys can't be bad guys. Or can they? Because,
only if you're the Thing and you're going to be Blackbeard.
In this world of strange shapes and whatnot that attack people, there still manages to be a like hot alien chick to like fall in love with him and be like, no, don't do this, don't do that, and explains that although Dormammu is a bad guy to Earth, and even there, actually, I think he's not a nice guy. He is
the only thing holding back the mindless ones, or
right. He's like keeping up this big shield to keep like these evil, chaotic creatures from killing everyone in
this odd dimension.
Yeah.
Knowing the story you're talking about and not having read it recently, but just kind of looking at it, I know these call back to the days where Doctor Strange is still kind of the apprentice and he still has a living master. And I think a lot of that harkens back to probably what Lee and Ditko and guys like that were reading, which were the old magazines where you had like Shandu the Magician or Mandrake the Magician, kind of in that Flash Gordon era of characters, where there's always, the hero is always the apprentice to the higher power and always set out on the hero's quest. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of that kind of harkens back to kind of that earlier era mythology. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's probably what you're seeing a lot in the story.
I will say to touch back on Melanie's point about keeping these creatures out. I did appreciate that it wasn't just a black and white, hey, good guy, bad guy's threatening me, go take care of it. It was that setup, but then you get there and you're like, well, this bad guy does want to do bad things to my dimension or my world, but, taking him out is going to cause problems for this people. There was gray there. It wasn't just a black and white, good and bad. It was, there was complication. So I definitely did appreciate that aspect of the story. And also, what the mindless ones looked super cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those are neat.
They're kind of like, I don't know what they're supposed to be made of, but they look like mud creatures that shot these big laser beams out of their face. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
Because of the situation, when they started fighting, Dormammu started losing power and the shield also lost power, so they started getting in. And Doctor Strange gave him some of his own powers, I suppose, to put the shield back up. And so he didn't have to kill him, which makes him get to be an even better good guy.
Yeah, it's true. He kind of figured out a way to resolve the issue without, fighting him, basically.
Well, they fought a little bit, but I don't think either of them really got hurt at all.
They threw some lights at each other, and then they're like, hey, there's another threat, so let's throw lights at these guys.
Yep.
So let's have a mystical rave.
Yeah.
And eventually the day is saved because Dormammu has a honor code.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is...
Sorry, I was going to say, going full circle here to both issues we've discussed so far. Doctor Doom is number 2 in line behind Doctor Strange to be Sorcerer Supreme of Earth because his magic craft is that good. And they also beat on these storylines that you see with Dormammu, where if Doom were to be taken out of Latveria, or Doombots or psychotic children were there to rule in his stead, you would have the same problems where it's civil war and hurting the innocents. So that's a storyline that Marvel likes to hit on quite a bit, that theme.
Interesting, yeah. Good point. Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's not just, the obvious. There's that definitely adds interest to stories, and it also adds that conflict for the hero. Like this extra, like, well, what are you going to do? You got to try to figure this situation out. Yeah, that's good.
And it makes it more realistic too, because in the real world, oftentimes when you go to war, and then when you leave, there's different factions in a country that end up having a big, long, drawn-out civil war forever.
Mm-hmm. There were some cool aspects to this story. I was just kind of bored on a big chunk of it, because I was just not really on board.
I think part of our problem with it is the magic wasn't big enough, or not big enough, but like there wasn't enough of a reaction.
It just seemed too easy. It seemed like too easy of a thing where it didn't necessarily have any meaning as a conflict. It was like, well, here's this thing, and all I have to do is say this and flash a light or pull out this super awesome amulet that blows everything away, and it's taken care of. And maybe I suppose if I was more aware of the character and his backstory and what he can do and his limitations, like I said, I would probably get a better sense of what that means, just to be able to flash this amulet and take care of the bad guy,
Yeah, but also, it'd be nice if there were a more variety rather than I say a spell, some lights shoot out and whatever. If I say a spell and then some snakes come out and go and wrap themselves around him or something like that, that would make it more interesting.
You have a good point.
Here's how I would describe it. Reading a Doctor Strange comic like this one is like jumping into a D&D session where the characters have already leveled up and we don't know how he picked up that amulet. Like in D&D, you start out with your dagger and you're battling rats, but eventually you get this sweet amulet that does these magical powers, and you have to learn what those magical powers are in order to really use them. But then later on, you don't think about it; you just use it. So I feel like that's kind of what happens here a little bit. Also, we're dealing with essentially like the astral plane, and that's not a thing that happened visually a lot.
I was going to say Lee and Ditko are being forced to define the undefinable for the medium, and so that's probably part of the problem right there.
Yeah. And I didn't mind all of it. Some of the art was cool. Like there'd be like some random rectangle, and that obviously is kind of like they kind of render it with some perspective, so it looked like a 3D object. But there'd be like a creature popping out one side of it, but not the other side. Like there was some cool stuff done with perspective and dimensions that I appreciated.
They needed more upside down stairs.
Needed more upside down stairs?
MC Escher,
sure.
Yeah. And those mindless ones were pretty awesome.
And then he gets his, Mark II cape at the end?
I think he gets a new cape and a new amulet.
Yeah.
Upgrade!
Agamotto 2.0.
Yep.
And, okay, so I know this is just, basically it's the origin of Dormammu, but it almost felt like too small of a snip of Doctor Strange's story for me to get a good sense of it, I think is my main issue. Anything else on this one?
Nope. It was good. It was all right.
I don't know, like being a kid and reading this, Dormammu and his look was really captivating. Like now, if Dormammu comes out in anything, like recently, Dormammu and what's her name, Ilya Rasputin.
Colossus's little sister.
Yeah, they went toe to toe because she has strong ties to Limbo, and Dormammu was going to use Limbo as a way to, he was going to take over Limbo, and then he's that much closer to taking over the realm of men again. And so every time that Dormammu comes back, he's a little cooler to me. I have a little hey, I knew who that is, because he's not a character that gets used an awful lot in the Marvel universe because he's so powerful, and again because of the balance that he strikes in his own realm.
Yeah, he's kind of cool. And his head's made out of smoke or something. I like that.
I did like the look of him. Yeah, that's true. I did like the look of him. And I'll mention also, I have enjoyed the art of both the Fantastic Four stuff and this stuff. I mean, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko are, you know, legends. The art is pretty solid. I guess the design of some of that dimension I wasn't super keen on, but the characters look cool. So the last story is Loki.
And that one's kind of split up into 3 different parts. It's like like how Loki is kind of adopted, a little bit of their childhood, and then like a third part where they're a little more grown up.
Okay, well, first of all, the whole... and again, this is all that I've read of Thor or the Asgard stuff. I'm slightly disappointed in it just because I actually like Norse mythology, and I don't like...
This.
Well, you know, maybe not entirely, but some of it, yeah. I like the Norse Loki. Seems more interesting to me. The end of the story. So it starts with them, with Odin, battling Laufey, this giant. So they're battling and they win. And then there's like a bundle moving, and it's a baby. And Odin's like, it's his son, Loki, and he's hid him because he's ashamed of him not being a giant. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, why is he at a battlefield if he's a
Spoilers,
baby?
Odin. Spoilers.
And if he's ashamed of it and is keeping him hidden, then why the hell does Odin know everything about him? He knows his name. He knows, he's ashamed of him.
Yeah, that's
and I'm
kind
like,
of a good point. Yeah. Because somebody's got to tell the reader who it is. And Odin was standing there.
Also, these are told like way after the fact because of the fact that they were Norse mythology, they just jump in with Loki being Loki in the original run. And so this was kind of a one-off thing that they were just doing as a little feature, a little 3-part feature, which it wasn't normally. And just going back and finally telling the reader, like, okay, well, here's how this Loki is incorporated into the Marvel Thor mythology.
right.
Because we didn't really tell you, we just threw him in because he's Loki and he's pivotal to Norse mythology and everyone kind of knows that.
I thought that was odd that he knew all about him and whatever. And, I'm going to adopt him, even though I think everybody thought he was like, he's going to end up being evil. And he's like, that's okay. He's royalty, so he needs to be raised by a king.
Well, and I'm sure he was like, well, he's not necessarily going to be evil if I raise him. So then the second story we get, how old would you say? Teen, maybe preteen? Thor and Loki?
I'd say somewhere between 10 and 13.
And they're watching a battle, or like just like a fight, like a competition fight. And here's where Loki, for me, became very boring. Because the whole time you've got, Thor being Thor, just a good guy. And then the whole time, and this happens in the next story, and this is why I say he became very boring, because the next story is basically the same exact thing. Loki just thinking, everybody thinks Thor's perfect, and just being jealous. And I understand that that's Loki's part, but they just hammered that into the ground so much. I was like, okay. So, yeah, who was it? Thor calls, like, that guy's gonna win, or whatever.
Yeah.
So then Loki's like, well, I'll cast a spell so the other guy wins, and Thor will look like an idiot, and blah, blah, blah. And then they kind of get in trouble because it's obvious that there was some type of magical interference. And then they let him go because Thor's Thor. And they're like, well, Thor's a good kid.
We're going to let Loki go on this one because Thor's a good kid.
Exactly. Which I guess is kind of entertaining because that makes Loki all the more irritated, I think.
Yeah. But, and this is again me being nitpicky, I suppose, but if you're even slightly concerned that the kid might be evil, first of all, don't let him play with witches. And then don't set him up in
That's fair.
Don't set him up in this like competitive relationship with Thor, Let's have them go race here and bet on things together. That's probably not a good idea. And, maybe keep an eye on him just in case. And, if he does do something evil like use magic on somebody, sure, if you want to let him go because he's Thor's brother and Thor's such a good kid, that's fine. But maybe tell somebody, hey, you know what? He's up to a little evil. keep watch on him.
A little evil.
So we've got a little bit of Asgardian nature versus nurture here, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I actually wrote that down later, too. Nature versus nurture. Know which way it goes there.
Which one's the god of psychiatry?
I did want to mention the art on this one because this is like where the art is the most odd looking to me. Because who drew these? Well, I've got a couple names, so we probably have a couple artists. Jack Kirby, is it Chick Stone and Frank Giasoia? I'm terrible with names. It looked like they were having trouble doing young boys' faces. There was a couple panels where Thor and Loki, as teens or preteens, their faces looked like creepy adult faces on a child's body. For the most part, I liked the look of a lot of the Asgardians, but it's just with how they handled young Thor and Loki looked freaking weird, and Loki's face is super creepy, and not necessarily in a like he's a bad guy creepy. It just looked weird. That was the low point for the art in my opinion. It just looked very strange.
He had Professor X eyebrows at a young age.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that's good.
Other than that, I mean, I like the look of the Asgard stuff. So
You apparently get a monogrammed tunic when you're a teen in Asgard as well.
Especially if you're as good as Thor.
Yeah.
Curse him forever.
Yeah.
So then I guess we could move to the third and final installment. Mm-hmm. We get Thor and Loki a little bit older. They are fighting, was it just a giant or a hill giant or something like that?
Just a hill giant?
Well, it's just a hill
Run
giant.
into those often?
Yeah. Man.
Oh, you know.
When that happens.
Come across that every
Just
day.
sprayed for those.
Like the evil in this one is Loki's like, I'm just going to pull a Shaggy Scooby and hide behind this tree.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's
That's isn't that the main evil that he does in this one?
No, well, I mean, besides the fact that, yeah, he's like, I'm just gonna, like, go over here and let them fight it out. But then, at the end of the fight, when they basically had won, they were chasing down the bad guy and he had magically disappeared. But,
Oh, right.
which was really strange because this guy that, might be evil and dabbles in magic is like, I'll stay behind and look for him. You guys go ahead. And no one's suspicious. But,
that's true. It is kind of at this point.
He's just very low key. I'm just gonna keep doing that.
It's because he just internalizes it. Because he doesn't ever say it out loud. He's just constantly thinking, Thor sucks. I'm so jealous of Thor. Mm-hmm. And that's...
So he's like the emo god.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. But he obviously obsesses about it because he says at the end, or thinks at the end, I suppose, this is just the first in one of my plans to, defeat Thor and take over and whatnot, so.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's Loki's part, is that's kind of his thing. Mm. He hates Thor. Thor's the chosen one, the good son and all that, and so Loki's got that whole syndrome.
And not just that, I don't know if he's aware at this point, but he's supposed to be a giant, so he's got some kind of dwarfism issues.
That's true.
And,
He's got giant envy.
yeah, and like look at history, like Napoleon, like all these like really big conquerors are really tiny guys. It's
all
a complex.
Creepy man faces.
Yeah.
Oh, Professor X eyebrows. Unless they're on Professor X,
No good.
sign.
No good.
Something I hadn't thought about till just now as we're discussing it that I guess I kind of appreciate is the thought process behind Loki's hiding behind because he's waiting behind because, he doesn't want to help him win and all this and that. And he's going to have his devious thing. I think it's interesting that he would be doing this thing that seems very cowardly, but in his mind, he's doing the smart thing. So I think that's kind of actually that's a little bit of interesting villain writing. The idea of, what makes the best villains is villains that can justify their own actions. They're the hero of their own story. We talk about that quite often.
Yeah.
So I hadn't really thought about that, but that's actually kind of good. I like that outside of just Thor, Jesse, I wanted to ask you, I'm sure it's elevated because of nostalgia, but how was reading it now after all these years?
I knew it would be a little bit tougher because I have, I have several volumes of the Stan Lee runs, and I've gone back and I've read some of the early Avengers stuff, and it was harder to read. I mean, it's just a different style of storytelling, but at the same time it was fun because you're going back to seeing some of these characters that really don't really even get a lot of page time anymore. Like these are so classic a character that anymore we'll kind of relegate them to just super big story arcs. Like you don't see, it used to be where you'd see Doctor Doom show up in, first he was kind of the Fantastic Four villain, but he would show up in Spider-Man. He would show up in the Avengers. He'd show up kind of everywhere because he was so popular. He's the new guy, and readers wanted to see him. And now you see him. I mean, you'll see him, but he's not as prevalent. And when he is, it's a big deal. So yeah, it was fun. But yeah, it's a little harder to read because Stan Lee is quite verbose, and there's some redundancy in the storytelling where you're going to see it, you're going to hear him say it, and you're going to also read him thinking it.
Mm-hmm. I had a lot of criticisms of this, which I could probably get roasted for online pretty easily because they are classic stories. But I think that's in a way acclimatizing to the time period that a lot of these are taken from. And next month when we talk about the other stories, I probably won't necessarily have those criticisms because
I was going to say, did you find that it got easier to read as we went along? Like was this third chapter, I guess, for lack of a better word, was this third chapter easier than the first chapter?
Yeah, no, I definitely think by the end, I think I had gotten easier by the end of the Fantastic Four chapter. And even though I wasn't super thrilled with the stories in chapter 2 and 3, no, yeah, I think it definitely did because at first I was like, whoa, okay, I don't think I was ready for this.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I suggested we should probably break it up. And that wasn't just because of page count. It is something you got to get used to.
So I don't think I'll necessarily come to the podcast with the same criticisms. Next time I'll be able to be a little bit more objective about the stories. And in this case, I just wasn't thrilled with the stories in chapter 2 or 3, but the Fantastic Four stuff I thought got pretty good. So
I'll be the same next time.
You're going to be the same?
Yep.
You'll be curmudgeonly.
Anybody else have final thoughts?
Question for you guys. So reading these origin stories on these villains, 2 questions here. You talked a lot about the heroes that appeared in the stories. So did you feel that the villains got highlighted enough as they should have for origin stories? And my second question is, besides Norse mythology that we see in Loki, what did you feel that Lee and company went back and touched on any tropes that we know of from like mythology or old storytelling, from Western or even Eastern history? Or do you feel like they really tried to invent something new here?
To address the last one first, I'm not sure how much I guess some of the Doctor Strange stuff, as for the Norse stuff and Thor and Loki, you don't get, in these stories anyway, it's hard to get a good idea of the world they're building outside of Odin finds Loki, Loki hates Thor. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say how much new stuff, how much they're bringing and how much they're pulling. And
in a setting that, first of all, uses old gods, even if only by name. But also it's like a bad seed and like, competitive brother type thing. And that's like the oldest story.
I guess one of the reasons I asked that part was what I had noticed was when you guys were talking about the Doctor Strange story arc in particular, it really struck me as a knight-errant quest. Something that would go back to old Saxon tales. And it just really struck me as that. And despite your criticism of it initially, it really seemed like you guys were really kind of digging that part. And Doctor Strange is the Knight, what he had to face and the decisions he had to make.
Oh, yeah. Like the quest, I guess if you want to call it, the quest itself was pretty awesome. I just, like I said, I wanted a little variety in the happenings. would have been better. But other than that, yeah, I love that type of, I have to go and accomplish this to,
it's kind of, yeah.
I keep wanting to say level up, but I know that's not the appropriate.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
My fault on that. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that we talked about the heroes a lot, probably in most cases more so than the villains.
Yeah.
With the Fantastic Four, you've got a lot of Doctor Doom in there. That first story was a lot more Fantastic Four. Doctor Doom was just the villain. Mm-hmm. He just kind of put him in this situation and you're along with them. In the second story, about Doctor Doom's origin, we get a lot more where we're actually with Doctor Doom, well, kind of, his memories. So that felt more like a fleshed out villain origin. Mm-hmm. The Dormammu stuff, or however you want to pronounce it, we're, for the most part, like, we're introduced to, there's this bad guy, or, well, not necessarily this bad guy, but there's this entity, he's very powerful. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we're along for the ride with the hero. Mm-hmm. So it didn't necessarily feel like a villain origin. It was just like,
it was his first,
here's this character.
Yeah. It's like, here's his first appearance, but it's not how he became, the big bad or whatever. Mm-hmm. So.
And then Loki's was almost felt like we're too much along with Loki. And that was my beef, because not my beef with the storytelling, but my beef with the character is that he was just so one note that I didn't really want to be along with Loki for that ride,
Yeah, but I'd rather be Loki than Thor because he's a blonde.
What? That's weird.
Oh.
I think also, and this was in some of the stuff that Stan wrote in between the bits, was that I think one of the reasons we focus on the heroes so much, even though these are villain origins, is that a good villain really makes the hero more interesting. If it wasn't for a really good villain, we wouldn't care so much about the hero.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. The more challenged they are, the more you see how great they can be.
So is that it for Bring on the Bad Guys right now?
For now.
Yep. Put a pin in that one.
Okay. I wanted to ask real quick, because it got me thinking about what you guys were just saying about interesting villains make the heroes more interesting. Melanie and I finished Daredevil last night. The series. And I don't have to get into spoilers in case you haven't finished it yet, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm still on like episode 6, maybe. I think I'm maybe to episode 6.
But why that popped in my mind is the show's I think one of the like big successes of the show, I find in the show, this Netflix series version of Daredevil, Matt Murdock is interesting, but I think they did a much better job at making the Kingpin infinitely more interesting.
Yeah.
I think he's such an interesting character that he almost, not that he outshines Matt Murdock, but
he carries the story along.
He carries the story. Yeah. Like, I was really surprised at how much we are along with him and how kind of human, but I don't know. The writing, I think, is done really well.
Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin or Wilson Fisk is maybe, and I can't say for certain, but it seems like he's as human a Kingpin as I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And like you get more of Kingpin as time goes on, and he's a pretty old character, so there's a lot of Kingpin to be read. But in the show, you get to see some of his insecurities, and that is not really something you ever see of the Kingpin in the comics.
Yeah.
He's always very on top of it. He's he's the untoppable character, Kingpin of crime. And in this show, you get to see him like the courtship of Vanessa Fisk. Mm-hmm. It's like you get to see him kind of sweating it a little bit. Mm-hmm. At least from where I'm at, I'm kind of in the middle.
I just thought it was interesting. I think that shows one of that show's best, like, greatest strengths is how interesting they made the villain. Mm-hmm. Almost more interesting than Matt Murdock in a way. Mm-hmm. Like, his character is just flawed, but it's just very fleshed out more than I would have expected.
Well, it's because they hired D'Onofrio, and he makes everything better.
You know, and I like D'Onofrio in it, but I almost feel like at times he's too D'Onofrio. But it still works. It still works.
Because we were talking about villains. Have you guys seen the picture of Jared Leto's Joker?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I'll let you go first.
You know, I think a lot of people are turning their nose up to it right now, but I remember them turning up their nose to Heath Ledger as well, and I think he made the movie.
That's a good point.
You know, at this point, when it comes to movies that are made with comics as a source material, I'm willing to give it a shot. You know, I figure I'm just going to go in with the attitude of let Leto do his work, because I think he's a pretty good actor, and we'll see what he brings to the role, and I'll probably have more fun that way if I just go in munching my popcorn and just looking to have a good time.
It was probably the pose in the picture, but I was totally thinking this is like Macaulay Culkin at a Halloween rave.
Oh no! Now I can't unsee that. Well, you know, like my thought on it. Initially, I wasn't really thrilled with the image, but then I started to think, like all the promo shots we've seen of Jared Leto has been very referential of very popular comics covers. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, like I wonder if this is just a promo shot and it's just referencing a famous comic cover where, you know, I mean, the comic cover that they're referencing, he's got all the ha-ha-has in the background. It's very classic. And so I wonder if those tattoos aren't even a part of the character necessarily, but just part of a promo shot kind of a situation to reference that, but in a new way. And who knows, maybe he'll have all those tattoos. The one that kind of bugged me was the letter J under his left eye.
Me too.
I was like, I don't know if I don't know if that's a tattoo that the Joker would get. Not that I know what the Joker would do, but yeah, it seemed a little too. I mean, like he's self-aggrandizing, but not in the way where he would like draw pictures of his face on his body.
I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I don't like it, but at the same time, there's interesting. I don't mind the Jared Leto no eyebrows look for Joker. He's got like a slender kind of face, and I don't think he's a bad cast for the character necessarily, depending how he plays him. Some of the tattoos I don't mind. I don't like the little J tattoo. I don't like the damaged tattoo on his forehead. Seems a bit much, but yeah, it's hard to say from that image, but I'm kind of conflicted on it.
It's tough. I can't imagine being in the position of the writer. Whoever's got to write this, you know, you've got to follow Heath Ledger, who had to follow Jack Nicholson, and you've got to somehow reinvent this character in a way that audiences are going to react to, and they are reacting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. With all these DC movies coming up, I'm just kind of, I mean, I'm excited to see Batman v Superman, but I'm just kind of like cautious. I'm not down on it. I'm not super pumped. I'm just kind of like very curious what they'll be and hoping they're not crap. Because I'm a DC reader, you know, I'm
right,
like primarily a DC reader, so I want them to be good. And the Marvel movies are generally pretty awesome. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of waiting to see what they are. Is my look at it.
Well, you know, I'm a bit of a negative Nancy, and I'm wary of this Joker. But no matter how bad it is, Ben Affleck's Batman, so I'm already disappointed.
I think that was. Ben Affleck as Batman was the most worked up I got. And I think it's kind of like it's like a high water mark. I don't think they're going to get me more riled up than that. So anything else at this point, I'm just indifferent. I'm like, okay, let's see what happens.
Well, I think Affleck's Daredevil already stole most of the Batman cliches anyway, so he's been doing the role.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
You know, I was going to say, too, on the Joker tattoos, since this is Suicide Squad, you know, this is generally a team that goes in and does Black Ops stuff. And so they're probably looking to make the Joker look more streetwise and more ready for a fight. than what we've traditionally seen him as. Not the Cesar Romero cackling Joker in the background while the thugs are attacking everyone. This is someone who's now being forced to go into the front lines. So I could see a knife-wielding Joker coming in.
Well, and with the tattoos and the little J tattoo about where they would put a teardrop tattoo.
Little J.
It definitely seems like it would be a more thuggish result of prison time type Joker that they're going for.
I think they're also going to probably, and this is just pure speculation, but the fact that Harley Quinn is going to be a huge element in this movie too. I think we're going to see more of a Bonnie and Clyde situation there.
Yeah.
Which could be interesting. I'm interested to see a live action Harley Quinn Joker portrayal, like what their relationship would be in a movie, in a live action movie.
Yeah.
It could go either way.
I think we can all agree that we have seen our fair share of superhero crap come out. It's just, we know there are terrible movies out there. Anyone seen Steel? Shaquille O'Neal portraying who I thought was a great character in DC Comics, and I still like this character, but it's a terrible movie. So I think just kind of going in with the attitude of it's going to be what it's going to be, and let's see what comes of it without, holding it to an expectation is probably the best thing we can do at this point with any movie.
Really, the casting choice I was a little more squeamish about in Suicide Squad is Will Smith as Deadshot, because I don't feel like Will Smith has given us a really convincing villain yet.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I'd like to be proven wrong with that. I'd like to see Will Smith step up and really feel like a villain for a change.
His son knows karate. Did you know that?
Yeah. Well, or kung fu.
Kung fu, sorry.
In a Karate Kid movie.
Yeah,
but his kids read like quantum physics for fun, so.
Or at least they say they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I'm just not thrilled about Will Smith cast in anything. I don't hate Will Smith. I think he can be a decent actor. I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't thrilled to hear him. I didn't even care who he was cast as. I just wasn't thrilled to hear him in there.
It's like...
It's messed up, I know.
I'm sorry.
Well, I guess he's like the most superhero-y of the Suicide Squad, but yeah.
Did you just make Deadshot the Pauly Shore of the Suicide Squad? Everyone's like indifferent to him.
Yeah. He's wheezing the juice.
He's shooting the weasel.
Oh, wow.
we took it way back. Yeah.
All right.
We stunned him into silence, folks.
You know what that was? You know what that was right there? That was dead air.
Yeah, it was dead air. Our new segment, Dead Air. Every other episode, we'll talk about a new trade of The Walking Dead. Since this is the first, we're starting at the first with Volume 1, Days Gone By. Covers The Walking Dead issues number 1 through 6. Going right back to the beginning. Written by Robert Kirkman, with art by Tony Moore. Who wants to... I guess we talk about our introductions to this, The Walking Dead comic. It's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. It's kind of popular. I don't know if you've heard of it.
A bit. Heard about it a bit.
I think... Now, I have not read that far into the series, but I think this is the third time I've read this particular book.
This is only the second time that I've read it.
Mm-hmm. I think most people know the general story because it's pretty close. A lot of aspects, particularly the first couple issues till he joins up with the camp, are very close to the TV show. So it plays out pretty close to that. Yeah,
in fact, going back and rereading it, that kind of surprised me how quick it got into it. It was like by the third page, he was waking up in the hospital, unawares of what had happened and that, zombies are everywhere.
Me too. Even though, like I said, I've read this, I think, twice before this last read, I was also surprised at how quick they went through the whole, this is Rick. He's a cop. He gets shot. Like, I thought that took up a little bit more time. No, they are quick to it. Yep. They're just like, we're not going to waste any time. It's zombie apocalypse.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Which came, this is a chicken or the egg question, but which came first, 28 Days Later or The Walking Dead comic?
It's close. I need to find out because it's the exact same setup. but it's got to be pretty close.
And I kind of, like my aversion to origin stories is going to be telling in this, but I kind of like that where we just jump in. Like, that's one of the things I like about 28 Days Later is like, boom, we're in it. And now we have to figure things out alongside our protagonist. Same thing with Rick is like, well, he doesn't know what's happened. And we're going to figure it out alongside him.
Okay. 28 Days Later came out in 2002.
Yeah. I don't know I don't know why it matters really, but it just like, I wonder if one references the other is basically where my question's going on that.
Maybe they were both at a party and somebody's like, well, what if? And then they both were like, yeah, I'm going to run with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's coincidental, it's one of those things. I mean, it happens sometimes. October 2003.
Oh.
So, 28 Days Later came first.
But when you're talking about a comic book that's run as long as it has, stealing the beginning is small potatoes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
it's a strong first act.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfectly.
And from there, it deviates from that, from 28 Days Later pretty quick. I mean, other than the fact, it's zombies, but...
And I'm not sure they're even really technically zombies in 28 Days Later.
No,
right?
they're infected people.
Yeah.
But one thing reading these, I'll just like some general things before specifics. One thing reading this, there was kind of in the early 2000s, the zombie boom, the reboom, because zombies had kind of been like low-key, not low-key. The zombies were like, I hate Thor. I want to say since like...
that would make a good zombie movie, I think.
Zombie, yeah. Since I want to say the 80s or so, there was kind of the 70s and 80s, zombies were riding high. And then it was not that popular until 28 Days Later, they remade Dawn of the Dead. There was kind of that big boom again. So this came out about that time, which makes sense. Sure. Zombies are popular again. And chances are Robert Kirkman is probably a zombie fan anyway. I would hope so if he's got tied into writing a zombie story for so long.
He's awful sick of it by now, right?
Yeah. But I found reading this and then thinking about some of the other zombie comics I've read since then, zombies are popular. There's lots of zombie comics now. This still kind of stands out. Like it's not just that it's a zombie story. Like it's pretty well done. The writing's pretty good. The art is awesome. And there's a lot of humanity as opposed to some of the other zombie stuff I've read where it's just, it's just a zombie story. There's people there. They're either cliched characters or they're just flat. It's just not very good. And then this is like, it's not just that it's a zombie story. It's actually a pretty good story.
I don't think it's a zombie story. I think every good story involving zombies, they're the backdrop. I think it's a humanity story, and it just happens to be set in this world with zombies.
I would totally agree with you. I would say that that's the only kind of good zombie story.
I'd agree. Definitely.
Well, I think what sets this one apart from some other zombie stories is that in other zombie stories, they're kind of like dealing with one big theme like survival or, like humanity at its core. And this one seems to feel like it's dealing with interpersonal relationships. Like, how do we relate to people? And especially when things stop getting nice and start getting real.
Yeah.
So yeah, the real world was really a beta test for The Walking Dead.
I see it.
There is some drama. There's some drama.
If Carol would just pay her rent. Sorry. I'm jumping to the TV show already.
So, okay, well, these first couple issues, it's Rick. He gets out and goes back to his house. Nobody's around. He comes across, I'm terrible with names, so I can't remember the characters' names.
Morgan.
But
Morgan and Dwayne.
Yep. He comes across them. I just want to say here, like, I'm kind of bummed that Tony Moore is only on the first 6 issues because I love the artwork in this whole, in these 6 issues.
I love how different he does. I mean, it's all him, but his people versus his zombies are really strikingly contrasted. Like, his Rick is very square jaw, almost like Disney prince kind of handsome leading man kind of look. And then you get to the zombies and it's just like flies and flesh hanging off. And
Yeah, you're right. I mean, at times the living humans, I mean, they always look not necessarily super stylized, but they do. You mentioned like Disney prints, almost clean lines, kind of simplified. And then, zombies are just, they're gnarled. The flies are a big thing looking at it because they're all over. Like how many times was he just sitting there drawing these little tiny flies all over these zombies?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The gore looks fantastic. I like that it's black and white. I think the black and white look works really well.
Yeah.
Is it still black and white?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good.
All except for like one chunk of one issue.
But that's a whole nother
But that's a
thing.
whole other thing. Yeah.
I have not read that, but I know the backstory behind what she's talking about. How far into the series is that? Will we get to that eventually?
I don't know how far are we reading.
I don't know. It'll take us a year to get through 6 trades, so probably not far enough.
The first issue is just him waking up, discovering the whole, zombies happened, which waking up alone in a hospital and then being attacked automatically kind of, must be very rough, but he seems to take it well, but he's a cop, so maybe that's that. And then, gets whacked in the head by Dwayne, and then he wakes up and, they introduce themselves and whatever. Morgan, by the way, I don't know if he's just lucky or if he's smart and they're downplaying it, but he was all the right moves. Be quiet and stay out of the city and
Don't use the gun; it'll attract them.
Yeah.
He's got his stuff down off the bat.
When I think that was a clever way to work in some exposition without it feeling like exposition. Morgan knows what to do, and that kind of gives us some of the zombie rules before we even hit Atlanta.
So he had that little, escape from the hospital, I suppose. That was hard for him. But on his way, right before he meets Morgan, is when he sees the, really torn up zombie next to the bike. And I think that's maybe when he really realizes the situation.
And they did that in the show, but I really like that moment. Because, that is him, interacting with the zombie. But it is such, you get the, weight of how it hits him emotionally. That he makes a point to stop later and shoot it.
I was going to ask about that because it's not the first time he confronts zombies. That's actually in the hospital where he's being attacked, where I would think that would be the most horrifying moment as opposed to one just laying there, the bicycle girl. And I noticed they lend a lot of weight to her, and he even makes it a point to come back and, so to speak, free her. So why do you think there was so much weight put on that one particular zombie as opposed to any of the others?
I think in the hospital it would be horrifying, but at that point I think there's the panic and the adrenaline and the initial shock. And I don't think it's till he comes across her that it sinks in that this was a human. Look what's happened to this person. What is going on here? I think that's when it logically sits in. Or starts to set in what's happened to these people and how, and that she is particularly I want to say, is she just the top half of, she's just the,
I believe that was off the TV series. I think you see the whole thing in the comic.
Okay.
Yeah, her body is there, but it's really mangled or desiccated. It's messed up.
What I have wondered is in the hospital, he's a resurrected, for all intents purposes, walking among the resurrected. So there's one story arc. By the time he confronts her, he's alive and Set is alive where she is not. So is that where there's a split in the road in the storylines? Is that why she gets the weight as opposed to him going back to the hospital and cleaning that out?
When it's also, isn't it a zombie little girl, or is it?
I think that's an adult at the bike.
It is an adult.
Yeah.
They don't. Do they do the little girl at the gas station?
They
in the
don't
comic?
do no.
I was really surprised that was in the TV show and not the comic book. Because for a TV show, that is particularly hardcore.
Yeah.
And the comic, I was a little surprised. I was like, oh, that wasn't in here?
Well, I think they needed to set themselves apart. Not only that, but kind of try to one-up it so people that were fans of the comic would still be interested in the show. You were talking about his reaction to that one zombie. Yeah, he had the lonely teardrop.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I like him on the road. Him alone. The art looked nice. I like the atmosphere of him traveling alone. They've got, after he parts ways with, did you say Dwayne and Morgan? The image that's now kind of the iconic, iconic image from the show of him riding into Atlanta along the freeway and the cars and all this. They've got all that. I don't know. I think I like The Walking Dead when it's people alone out stranded somewhere, Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that, but I like that anyway.
Yeah.
And the first couple issues are very much just that.
At the end of the first issue, he goes with Morgan to the police station. He gets a cop car, gives him a cop car, gets guns, gives him guns, and then takes off. And at the second one, it starts with him running out of gas in the police car. And so then he wanders to buy a farmhouse, and that's where he finds the horse. And the family inside had...
Yeah.
Suicided. So...
Suicided? Yeah.
So were they a squad?
They were a squad.
Well...
A suicide squad, except they probably didn't feel very cool.
Yeah, I know. But
yeah, that's a fair... that's fair.
But yeah, he has quite a reaction to that, and then rides, I like this part, as he's riding the horse into Atlanta, he's talking to it. And I'm like, that's fantastic, because that's totally what a normal person would do.
Yeah, I like that, because he has been out alone on the road, and here's an actual living creature. Yeah, he's talking to it until he bums himself out by talking about his best day.
Then he rides his horse into the city. Here's a little bit of an issue. I mean, he's been handling it well and whatever, and maybe he doesn't know entirely what's going on, but he should know enough that when he sees the first zombie or whatever, be like, I'm riding into a city, and there's a zombie. Maybe I should be a little cautious. And he really is not.
Yeah.
But we are also glazing over the fact that when he talked to Morgan, that Morgan had said that Atlanta and areas like that were supposed to be safe zones at this point. So at this point, he's probably still thinking it's just a straggler on the outskirts.
That's a good point, too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jumping forward, after he gets to the camp, he's shaking, and I'm not going to worry about spoilers, but Laurie's like, you're shaking, and he's like, I hadn't really taken any time to be scared. I've just been going, basically, is what he said. So I thought that was interesting, but it also kind of, a little bit more reason why in these early issues he's not, he's reacting strongly to things, but he's not just terrified the whole time. Right.
Because he's just...
Well, and Kirkman gives him a reason to go into the scary house. He's looking for Laurie and Carl. He's desperately trying to find his family, so he's doing the stupid thing that no one in their right mind would do. And he's got a reason to do it.
When he's in Atlanta and, walks into the zombies, they start eating the horse, which is sad. And then Glenn comes and rescues him from the zombies. And then they start talking, and as they're escaping, they're talking. And, he's like, where have you been for the last month or whatever, and all that. And toward the end of that, they bring up Laurie and Carl, and he's like, well, if they were here, then they're gone. I hate to have to, say it this way or whatever. So not only is he dealing with all of whatever, but right before he gets there, he's thinking they're dead probably. So when he sees them, not only can he, not in danger, but it's like such a relief that it's going to be a super emotional time.
Well, and he gets to the city and finally sees the scope of things. And then, at that point, reality starts sinking in. But then, he, he meets back up with Laurie and Carl. So I think it's interesting to put that, like, it's really a turn page to where you're like, you got the one character telling Rick, or you got Glenn telling Rick they're probably dead. And then you go turn page. And they're not. They're right there. I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It kind of bombs out your expectations, too. Because if you're reading this for the first time, you're like, oh, okay, now I see what the story arc's going to be. And they end it in the turn of a page.
Yeah, exactly.
It's done.
And now when he gets to the camp and meets everybody, there are less people in here than in the show.
Are there?
Yes. Several less.
Yes.
No T-Dog.
Nope. There's
T-Dog.
Shane, Alan and Donna, who I don't know, they're a couple with the twin little boys. Dale, Jim, yeah, and then Carol and Sophia, and Amy and Andrea, and that's it.
Well, who else was in the show?
T-Dog, Merle and Daryl.
Yeah. Carol's husband was still alive, or was alive.
There was that one lady, I don't remember her name, the black lady that left them at the CDC, or stayed at the CDC.
Oh, yeah.
There was a bunch of extra people. He meets all of them, and then Dale, he's not necessarily bad-talking Shane, because he makes a point to say, oh, he's been really helpful and whatever, and saved everybody. But he's had his eye on Lori.
He out of nowhere and really quick, actually.
Yeah, like as soon as he got there.
It seemed like, one of his first, alone interactions with Dale, and he's like, watch Shane, he's eyeballing your woman. Mm-hmm. He just throws it out there, and I thought that was interesting, because obviously I knew it was coming, but there was like no lead up to it. It was just like, hey, boom, here's this little thing you might have to deal with. And
then they go hunting, and they find a zombie eating a deer, and that's the end of that issue.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Which issue was that? 3? There was something in 3 I have a note of that I wanted to mention. Interesting moment with Carl and Sophia, where they're playing in the dirt and talking about, she's like, do you think my daddy will show up? And Carl's just like very brashly, of course he's a kid, just like, ain't your daddy dead? And, there's kind of a sad moment. She says she misses her daddy, and, well, yours came back, and blah, blah, blah. I like that moment. I just want to note that. Interesting.
Do we feel like, at this point, Kirkman's set up the rules to this universe well? Because, we're, 3 issues in now? Mm-hmm. Do we understand how this world works? What these zombies are about, what they can, what they cannot do, what they're after?
They followed, I think, general zombie rules to where you kind of assume things, and they don't deviate from the traditional slow zombies. Don't get bit. They do mention that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Glenn puts a lot of that out.
This is before they go back into Atlanta too, where we discover that the smell is part of it.
Right. Rick kind of intuitively picks that one up real quick.
Yeah, he does.
It's like, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I noticed we have animals are consumed, but we don't see animals being turned yet. So this seems to be strictly a human thing, is what I noticed too.
Mm-hmm. Although at
least at this point, I don't know how the rest of the series goes.
Every animal that we've seen them eat that is eaten. But they do make a point when they see it, they're like, should we get the deer from him? And he's like, I don't know if we want to eat that after.
Right.
What
kind of diseases are in this thing now?
Right.
They do establish the bite, don't get bit, you'll get infected. And I believe they also established that, I could be wrong, but whoever dies comes back.
Not yet.
They haven't established
I don't know.
Yet?
No, I don't know. Actually, no.
Well, I would think that would go with the don't get bit thing. Because Glenn says you get bit once, you're done.
Well, as opposed to like being infected.
Gotcha.
I thought they had established that.
You're thinking of in the show, not in the comic.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. And obviously, like right away in the end of in the first issue, they established you have to, then not necessarily like.
Yeah, Morgan talks about the headshot.
Smoosh their head, but yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yep.
Well, and interestingly enough, in the hospital, if you notice, Rick broke its neck.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized he had made that one immobile for some reason. So that kind of stuck out in his mind, too. They're slow. We know this much. Mm-hmm. We don't have fast moving.
Rick and Shane get in a little argument about whether they should stay or not, and they decide to stay, but then they say we need more guns. So Rick and Glenn go on a gun run, and that's when the zombie gore comes in. They spread themselves with zombie gore to mask their scent and go into town. But they're saying that they don't know how smart they are. And if it's the scent that they're after or the sound, or, well, they know they react to sound, but, how aware they are of things around them. Basically, they don't know all that kind of stuff yet.
And kind of jumping when you mentioned the gun run, did Rick's logic kind of hit you as flawed that he assumed in Atlanta City that no one would have ever thought to have looted a gun store?
Yeah, a little bit.
That just seemed kind of flawed because Glenn was like, man, that makes perfect sense. Let's get in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and, they...
infested city and find a gun store that is surely not looted.
And, it was flawed, but it turned out, in this case, I think it's more the story logic because it turned out, no, it hadn't been looted and they got guns. But I do think that is
like they
a flaw.
Established one rule and then broke another at the same time too with the gore, because they like smeared themselves with the with the mask so that they mask their scent, and then they go in there and they're talking the entire time. Like that wouldn't be a...
Well, they mentioned it. They actually, and this is something I hadn't necessarily caught on earlier reads. They do mention, that they don't seem to take
Glenn
notice.
mentions it, doesn't he?
Oh, I think
Yeah,
right.
to their talking. Maybe they can't. Maybe they just don't
They
understand.
don't understand it. It just sounds like sound to them.
Right.
But then Rick at one point takes an axe to a zombie's face, and Glenn's like, "What are you doing? You don't think they're going to notice that?"
Right.
Have you guys? I could be wrong, but the whole smearing themselves with the zombie gore and getting the stink and going amongst them, that seemed like kind of a new idea. I hadn't necessarily. I don't think I'd seen that in a zombie movie or something before.
Yeah,
I know I hadn't, but...
I mean, it seems logical, but...
Nothing that comes to mind for me.
Yep, nope.
So that's always something that's definitely stuck out at me in this very memorable scene, and I'm glad they kind of recreated it in the show, because that just didn't seem like anything they've tried in a zombie movie before, so... And of course it would rain.
Yeah. It would rain. But besides that, they're going in to get a bunch of guns. You would think they might come prepared, rather than a freaking shopping cart of guns to try and push through a bunch of zombies. That just...
Yeah,
What was that? What was that? Smash TV?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is old school video games on it. Smash TV. Get the guns, get the cash, get out.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a little ridiculous. But whatever, they made it out.
Well, I thought so too. I thought so too, because I was like, a shopping cart is loud. Like, even if the zombies didn't look at that and be like, we don't really care for shopping carts. What are these guys doing? Either way, a shopping cart full of guns and ammo would be about the loudest thing you could push through a crowd of zombies.
Yeah, no kidding.
But, whatever. Like, I understand their ideas. Yeah, they were just going to throw it in there and run.
It feels like Kirkman's also like throwing in some like, and I don't know if he's doing it just to kind of poke the bear kind of thing, but he's putting in a lot of like social issues and like political issues, like gun control kind of things. Like, well, everyone should, like Rick's very pro-gun. He's like, everybody in the camp needs to have a gun. He's a survivalist, and yet he's getting a lot of resistance.
Mm-hmm. No, that's kind of interesting.
It's like, well, do I give, is Carl 6 at this point?
7.
7?
I think they said.
Like, do I give my 7-year-old son a gun?
Right.
He's practiced and he knows what's safe.
Well, and they
But
even make
is it
that
okay?
They
Yeah.
even make that scary, because Carl's like runs off all excited. Nobody better have touched my gun, So it's like that little extra bit to enforce. This is just a little kid.
He got bit. Rick got bit, but it didn't go through, apparently.
Yeah, his jacket, and then
And the backpack strap.
Totally forgot about that.
yeah, and then he even strips off his shirt and was like, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah. Let's not tell Lori.
And leading into that, there was also some humor, which there hadn't been a lot of humor in this so far with him and Glenn. Not just like Glenn vomiting because of the nastiness, but they even like kind of joke amongst themselves and have a little bit of fun walking into the situation. So I thought that was cool. And so far, we don't get a lot of humor anywhere else in it.
But it was very deadpan.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as they're covered themselves in gore and filth.
And then the last thing of import that I have for that issue was the little interaction with Lori and Shane when he's trying to comfort her or something because she's worried about Rick. And that's when you find out that they had a night.
A night on the road. She moves quick.
So does Shane.
Yeah.
He's got some designs there.
Yep.
He's got his eye on her. And then in the next issue, they brought back the guns and they all start the target practice.
Yeah, there's some time jumps in here. Like they would make mention that we've been doing this for a couple months now, or something like that.
Yeah, they jump at least 3 weeks. They mentioned 3 weeks, but that's not even necessarily since they've been there. That's just, the last 3 weeks, so-and-so has improved on their gun, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, there's definitely, they've been there for a while at this point.
You start to have like those interactions, or this may have happened earlier, but the interactions between the ladies, like when they're doing the laundry. And so then you get that social issue of what's not about, it's not about equal rights or whatever. It's about getting the laundry done.
It's not just about survival now. Now we're comfortable enough where we can gripe a little bit.
And it's not even like maybe a little bit with Rick's gun thing. Seems a little bit like the writer possibly poking the bear. But also different characters have conflicting views on certain things in a way that feels natural to their characters as opposed to the writer putting an agenda out. So I think that's interesting because it seems like the easy thing is for the writer to put his particular view out through all the characters as opposed to letting the characters breathe and have their own opinions. And the one lady always griping about.
Is that a character that's in the show? Is Donna in the show?
I don't think so.
I don't think it's necessarily her. They do have a family that's there for a time, but I'm not sure that that's supposed to be their family. And then they part ways when they go to the CDC in the show.
I know a lot of those people were lost in the show right away too when the big attack happens on the camp.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we lose a lot of that. I also noticed in this part of the story moving forward, Lori and Rick no longer seem to really be on the same page. They now seem to be just at odds on almost every issue when they're discussing things. And that's interesting to me too.
And there's like tension growing with him and Shane also. Yes. So.
And that escalates. That actually, the whole Shane thing period is way quicker than than I recalled, because he gets introduced. I mean, other than at the very beginning of issue 1 for like a page, for the most part, as a character, he gets introduced in issue 3, and he makes it 3 issues. And in that time, we get a bit of the drama between him and Lori, and then the quick escalation between him and Rick, where this disagreement about whether they should move the camp or not almost just seems like not an excuse, but it seems like an on the surface reason that Shane uses to break emotionally when it's really about Lori.
Right.
Shane's got a plan, and he wants to hunker down, and he wants to be the hero and the leader of this, and he admits to that later. And it's interesting in contrast to the show where Shane seems more aggressive all the time and Rick seems to be more conservative, at least in the first series of the show. The roles are very much reversed here, where it seems like Rick wants to progress and do more things and think a little bit further ahead, where Shane just wants to kind of hunker down and be Pollyanna about the situation.
Well, and what issue is it? Because, Rick goes to, as issue 4, I wrote Rick starts being Rick, starts taking control pretty quick. Like he's joins up with the group, and then an issue later he's already like, this isn't safe, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to teach everybody how to use guns, everybody should have a gun. Like really quick, Rick adopts there needs to be a leader here. And
that was almost more Shane's idea in the show, wasn't it? Yeah. That everybody needed to do target practice.
But if we go back to issue 1 and we look at Rick and Shane when they're having the standoff with the criminal, Rick's the risk taker. Shane's the one that hunkers down. And so we see that reflected even back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't connected that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, at the end of this issue is the zombie attack, which kind of brings everything to a head. Amy gets bit and in the neck, so, she's a goner. Lori is about to get attacked and she's struggling with her gun, and Carl shoots a zombie and saves her. And
the art looks like, and I know it's her struggling with the gun and dropping it, but the art looks like she grabs the gun and then just like throws it at the zombie.
Yeah.
I know I'm not saying that's a flaw of the art, but in my head, that's how that played out, and it made me chuckle a little bit.
I had the Benny Hill theme going through my head when it happened.
Yeah. And then there's Carl, and I could be wrong, but it's almost like he had a smile or something. Like he
and that brings me to kind of what I was thinking about the story is really, once Rick reunites with Lori and Carl, to me, Carl almost becomes more of the focus of this volume than anything else. To me, he turns more of the story, keeps things going and interesting over all the other conflicts I see.
Kind of a jump back, but something that happened in the comic that didn't happen in the show. Like maybe it did. I haven't rewatched season 1 in a while, but they went through and they introduced all the characters and what they did.
Uh-huh.
Kind of gave some of their story in that whole campfire setting, and I really liked that. And I don't know if I remember there being campfire scenes, but I don't remember it being
that straightforward. Here's who I am. Here's my backstory. Mm-hmm. But it was, I could see that actually playing out in real life where people would be like, well, here's who I am.
Yeah.
It's exposition, but at the same time, it's like not forced exposition.
Mm-hmm.
Or
when then you had Jim, who's just like mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But he was already traumatized before Rick ever got there, so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think in some ways he was the most realistic to me, because I don't know how buddy-buddy everyone would get in that situation. You are depending on one another, but like Carol's story, she seemed really quick to just dive right into it for a few panels, which isn't much to us, but you're getting the sense that she's just opening up about everything like every other character is. And, Jim's the one who's got the PTSD. He's the one that's still held back from these horrors.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Comic versus show, I think it was interesting that I liked seeing the decisions they made to write the show differently, change characters, introduce other characters.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very strong hint that Carol's husband was abusive because she says something and then kind of trails off, and you're like, okay, we know what that is. And then the show, I like their decision to be like, she had this abusive husband. Well, what if he's still there? And boom, he's there. He's in the show. He's a jerk. I just like seeing because sometimes they change things it just seems like just to change them, which is fine. And then in this case, you'd be like, okay, you could see where that thought process is. Mm-hmm. Like, well, here's some drama we could play with. It's set up. We'll just make him be alive still instead of dead.
Right.
More show and less tell.
Yeah.
I envisioned two very different characters when Carol was relating her story, because in the comic, he's the salesman that can sweet talk anything. And she alludes to an incident or incidents where he even sweet talked her back into the household. Mm-hmm. Where in the show itself, this was a hard-fisted, very brutal man that was going to keep his family close and keep them under his fearful watch. Where comic book husband of Carol seemed very much the poison dipped tongue. He's able to lure you back in even when you get away. And I think he was almost more interesting to me just learning about this character through reading it.
Leading up to, who was it that, not Amy? Who got bit?
Amy got bit.
Amy. Yeah. Leading up to that, I like the page before that. Actually, boom happens. You've got, and again, sorry for names, Donna, the one that's like, what are those three in that RV? Amy's like, I gotta pee, and gets up to go pee, and then you've got the panel of Donna just giving her like a dirty look, where you're just like, she just hates that girl. Mm-hmm. And then you flip, and reading it this time, I didn't realize that Amy got bit right after that. Mm-hmm. But I was like, oh, that's, I like that there's just that panel. It's just this little character thing. Doesn't serve anything. It's just this panel of her being disgusted with her. But then, you flip the page and she's getting bit.
Yeah.
I just like stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, well, that little panel of character stuff doesn't really matter because now this character's dead. But
I
don't know. The whole
it's realistic too. Like, your prejudices or whatever you feel is still going to read on your face, and then the terrible thing happens, and you're still going to have to react to it and even deal with your ugly side,
which she does at the funeral, where she has to kind of backpedal on her own behaviors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, Jim gets bit. That's like the very end is him being like, it's just a scratch. Mm-hmm. Which it's not, it's a bite. And then
he says it's just a scratch. And then the next panel is like a close-up, and it's this huge bite, mouth-sized chunked out of the
bones exposed.
Yeah.
'Tis only a flesh wound.
Yeah, that went through my mind.
Mm-hmm. And then issue 6 starts with the funeral for Amy. And then a little bit of, there's Jim in the camper, and they're like, checking on him and whatever, and discussing how long he might have. Eventually, I guess he just comes to accept that he's gonna die eventually, and he wants them to take him out to Atlanta and just leave him be so he can turn into a zombie and be with his family.
I enjoyed that quite a bit because it's a flip on the usual zombie, if if I get bit, shoot me. I don't want to be one of them. I don't want to be one of them. It's like a flip on that where he's just like, my family's probably zombies. Just let me turn into a zombie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
me here in the woods.
Maybe I'll be with them.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
And then they come back and go hunting.
The big Shane thing.
Yep. And Shane flips out. And I'm pretty sure Rick doesn't really know anything about that. The Shane and Laurie stuff.
No, at that point, it seemed like Daryl had mentioned it. He shrugged it off as like crazy old man.
Dale.
Yeah. Not Daryl. Daryl.
Yeah.
It seemed like Daryl had mentioned it. And then, Rick was just like a denial, like, what's this guy talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Until, this bit where Shane snaps and it goes from this to him talking about, like David mentioned, he has this plan. This is what he wanted to do. He had it all plotted out. He's going to hunker down here and get with Laurie, and the government was going to save them.
Yeah.
And Rick being there apparently ruined all of it.
Mm-hmm. He wasn't supposed to live.
Yep.
Rick came in there with, this specific argument in mind, and then Shane, goes off the rails, and he's like, what's going on? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Which, makes sense, but it was pretty obvious from Shane's reaction that even if there wasn't the whole situation with him and Laurie, I don't think he was equipped to handle a zombie apocalypse.
Oh, no.
At all. So he wasn't going to stay stable anyway.
And then Carl shoots Shane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Shane was yelling at him and had a gun pointed at Rick.
Mm-hmm.
And this is after, the fist fight, too.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of shocking that Carl would shoot Shane, even at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think, a little bit.
I think that his age really played into it. It's I think Carl's I know he's way younger than when this whole interaction goes down in the show, but his age really made a difference in how he was going to react in this.
And plus, with the day before, he had just shot a zombie, and he's been practicing with a gun, and he's a child, so it, shooting a person probably didn't seem like as big of a deal to him.
Till it happened.
Till it happened, right.
Because he even says it's not the same as shooting the dead ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, good.
Yeah.
For the kid. It shouldn't be.
When this is after he had shot one to save his mom.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's it. That's the end of the whole thing?
Yep.
With that moment?
Mm-hmm.
That's where they end it, yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, it kind of makes sense because in timeline of the story in the comics, they're there for at least a month, some unspecified number of time or amount of time. They're at this camp. It's crazy that Shane is in 3 issues, and in the TV show, Shane's a major character through the first 2 full seasons.
Mm-hmm.
They change him and Carl and that whole interaction because Shane's around so much longer. But it's a totally different dynamic. The way that whole thing goes down. It's almost like you should be. He's almost like treating Carl like a pseudo stepson for a while there, and that, we don't get any of that in this version. You don't see him buddying up to Carl really. I mean, he's been there for Carl, but we don't see that connection in the comic.
Mm-hmm.
So he's never forced to choose. It's just like a fear reaction. Okay,
so Melanie is up to current on Walking Dead, so she likes this.
Right.
This is the 3rd time I've read it, so it's obvious I like it. I've tried to read past. I've read a little further into the series before and just fell off at some point for some reason, but I really like this first issue. I think this first trade. It's a super strong start to a series that obviously is still going now, 13 years later? No,
well, yeah, they're into volume 20 or... it's more than 20.
20. Yeah, was I just seeing 23 out?
Yeah.
Something like that?
It's 140 something?
140 issues, yeah.
Yeah. For a while, they were going 2 issues a month, which is crazy for indie. I mean, as far as you can look at it as an indie, I suppose, but...
So is the show lending to that, or is it carrying that weight on its own with that amount of success?
I think it got there without the show, because they hit issue 100, I want to say before the show started, maybe around the same time, and it was a huge issue, amazing sales, and it seemed like shortly after that they started double issues per month. But I definitely think the show has helped. I don't think it's helped as much as you would think, because apparently TV shows don't really contribute that much to comic book sales. Same with movies, but it's got to have helped. You know, AMC apparently does not has taken a stance up, and I heard this maybe third hand on some podcast. I don't know, but apparently AMC has made a point not to advertise that it's based on a comic book, and they do not. Not that they don't want it known, but they have taken a stance that no, we're not going to highlight that fact at all, which is really crappy, I think.
You notice it is AMC's Walking Dead, not Robert Kirkman's.
Yep.
That's always very strongly pointed out.
Yeah, and that's the last credit in the opening credits is the three people that are kind of credited with the creation. But it's the very last thing you see.
But it's nice. Kirkman is still so closely tied to the show, though. He writes for the show. Right. So that's really nice. And also, like if he wasn't a fan, if he wasn't tired of zombies, then it's crazy that he was putting out 2 issues of Walking Dead a month and writing the TV series at the same time.
And he's writing the spinoff too now, isn't he?
Is he? Oh, well, that gives me more hope for the spinoff, actually. I didn't realize that.
Well, and he said he made an interesting point when they asked him about that, kind of revisiting these storylines, and he said he's having fun playing in his own sandbox because he gets to correct the mistakes he didn't get to initially. Things that affected the story arc later on, now he gets to make it go a different direction.
Jesse, what was your final thoughts on this first trade?
On the trade itself?
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to separate it from the show, but because I saw the show first, and so I was struck by both how similar they were, especially right off the bat, like how true they kept it, but yet how different it is too. I think the beginning is almost spot on the same to a point.
Yeah, it's really close. It's pretty crazy how close it was.
And then when it starts to diverge, it diverges in interesting ways. And I like each one individually for different reasons. There's certain things I think the comic did super well, and I don't know how it, maybe it affected the storyline in a way that Robert Kirkman wanted to change it, or they just changed it because it would work better for television, or that just happened to be the way that they wrote it, because I know they also dropped that writer right after that first season. No, I definitely enjoyed it, and I think it's going to be an enjoyable segment to do, to read ahead, because this is the only one that I've read, and this would be the second time I've read this one, but I have digital copy from the Humble bundles that they've been putting out of all of them, and now I finally can give myself a reason to read them all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to see how it goes, because I know later on when we're introduced to Michonne and some of these other characters, the people that had read the comics were super excited. And so I'm hoping eventually I'll be in that boat too, where I can get caught up and say, oh, that character.
And how about you, Dave?
I'm a lot like Jesse. I had known the comic had existed, but hadn't picked it up. And when the series got going, I watched it out of interest. And I like how some of the characters are flipped on their head in the series from the source material. I also noticed that where in the series you have more quiet moments and more character development, Kirkman really hits the ground running in the comics, at least in my opinion. I've read the first 4 trades, and I kind of tapered off on it because I wanted to keep the actual TV series more fresh to me. I didn't want those spoilers right off the bat. But to me, Carl in the TV series is not very interesting. In the comic, I loved this 7-year-old. I thought he was a really interesting and a neat character. Rick, he you've got square-jawed Andy Lincoln in the TV series. This Rick, to me, I know you guys kind of compared him to a Disney prince, but to me, he was almost a gainly little guy compared to big hulking Shane.
Oh, yeah,
in
sure.
the comic.
Yeah.
And to me, Rick was this scraggly little everyday man who, almost seemed to leap before he thought, where in the TV series, you have a much more thinking Rick. Once again, that flipping on the head of the characters. And I found that was interesting. Andrea and her sister Amy don't seem quite as militant as they do on the TV series. Carol is a very young woman, and it's not to make fun of the actress that plays her on the show, because I think she's wonderful. Carol's my favorite character on the show. But, just to see how they've played with type on this and how they've created very different worlds and different backgrounds that line up a lot between what you see between comic and show. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. So I think the trade's fun. I have a good time with it, and I'm looking forward. I think I'm going to pick up some more of the trades that I have and reread those and see what other differences I find between them.
And you, Randy?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I enjoy the story. I think my favorite part, other than like the story's got to be good, or else it's just, some good art. But I think one of my favorite aspects is the art in this first trade. It's just really well done. The panel layouts aren't usually super stylized, but I've noticed a couple really interesting things in the panel layouts that I enjoyed that I hadn't necessarily noticed in other comics. Like one conversation will be spread across 2 panels, and that's not totally unique, but I don't know, just done in kind of a simple, subtle, but striking ways. I'm excited for this excuse to read further into the series.
And you mentioned the art, and I'll just reiterate that like Tony Moore's splash pages, like that full page where they get back to Atlanta and you see the tank. I mean, it's the only time that the tank even comes into play in the actual comic. It has this huge role in the survival of Rick when he first gets to Atlanta. But in the book, it's just there. Mm-hmm. But it's such a striking image that, of course, they had to do something with it.
And I think the black and white really helps to highlight, especially in the particularly in those, like that splash page, highlight all the detail he put into the art. All the stupid flies, all the thousands of flies, all the zombie gore. Not that it wouldn't look good with color, but when it's just black and white, like it really, I think, highlights all those details.
It really does make it a dead world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When even it's it's like apparently they must have had some kind of falling out, Tony Moore and Kirkman, but like he gives Tony Moore some serious props in the introduction to the first volume, at least the copy that I have. Mm-hmm. And it's, I don't think it's unwarranted at all. I am interested to see how the art goes forward. Cause like I said, I haven't read beyond this first one. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to see how the art changes. And I don't know if it has anything to do with anything, but, just having the two things that we read this month were interesting bookends to each other. You had the really classic style Marvel with superheroes and supervillains and origins. And then you jump to way more modern storytelling. And, it was like really easy to read. Like between the two, it took me a long time to read Bring On the Bad Guys, even though we read only half of it. And then Walking Dead was just a breeze after that.
Yeah, I would agree.
And the page count's not all that different. If you look at just pages, one's not really that much longer than the other. I don't want to draw comparisons where there are none, but do you think that the Shane and Rick thing bears any resemblance to the Loki Thor situation?
A little bit.
Maybe more Cain and Abel, I don't know.
Because there's definitely in both cases, there's the jealous for what he's got. And I could do this if it weren't for the golden boy in my way type attitude in both. Kind of, I could see that, yeah.
No monogram tunics, gentlemen. There's just no comparison right there.
Yeah.
See?
Good point.
And we need to relook at the eyebrows.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shane didn't have Professor X eyebrows.
Shane we needed more thought bubbles of how jealous of
More
Rick
introspection going on about his evil plots.
Yeah. Yeah.
How could I foil Rick?
Shane thinking, is it pronounced Dormammu or Dormammu?
Now, Shane lasting 2 seasons in the series in the TV show versus three issues. Now, I think season 2 has pacing issues, but I'm glad, like, it makes sense for TV series to take and latch onto that drama and draw it out more, because if they'd have stuck with the pacing of the comic book, it would have been like bam, bam, bam. And I don't know that it would have worked in a TV series.
Well, if it's going to be 1-for-1, why watch the series?
Yeah.
There's no point to it.
That's all I got for Walking Dead and bringing out the bad guys for this month.
Comic-Con.
Oh, yeah.
Is coming up. And you're toying with the idea of doing a podcasting panel?
I really want to. It's just I'm having a very hard time forcing myself to send that email. It sounds awesome. I do, we're toying with the idea of doing a panel at the Comic-Con about podcasting, since, that's something we both can talk about. And it sounds fun. I would have never thought about doing a panel, but after the last convention, I was like, I bet we could do it.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, public speaking is horrifying. And I'm like, part of me is like, yeah, I really want to do it. Send that email. And the other part of me is like, as soon as I do, I'm going to be like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
And I've got a month of dread, but I don't really think it'd be that bad. So I'm going to send the email.
Do it. I can help you with the format a little too. I think if we like co-moderate almost, where when it comes to tech issues, I'll just ask you questions, and then all you have to do is kind of respond to them. And then the rest of the time, you can kind of moderate and just ask us questions, and we can just respond or whatever.
Yeah, I think once actually in it, I think it wouldn't be too bad. And yeah, I don't think we'll have trouble filling the time.
No, and then we'll have an audience, and they'll have questions, so we'll just answer them.
Like I mentioned at the last convention I went to panels, there was even a panel about podcasting and a panel about some other kind of related thing where it gave me ideas where I was like, I like that they mentioned that, but I really wish they'd have took it further and mentioned that. So it definitely gave me like a basis for, if we're going to do a panel about podcasting, here's, from the limited experience I've had at panels, here's what worked in this panel. Here's where they probably should have took it further. So yeah, I think it's doable.
Yeah. Well, and you've launched how many podcasts?
A couple.
Yeah.
A couple.
So the openings of how to create a podcast pretty well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what most people are interested in.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Is how do I get started?
Yeah. So that could be a thing. It could be a thing.
Keep your ears to the ground.
I'm gonna record it too, if that's a thing. There's no way I'm not gonna record it. Oh yeah. Got to.
I mentioned it on the podcast so that to force your hand.
Yeah, hey, that's good.
See what I did there? I didn't use thought bubbles to announce my villain, but it was there.
What magic spell is this?
What magic spell is this? Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Oh, before we do movie quotes, we should, conclude with thanking Dave for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Sharing a Sunday evening with us.
Yeah. I hope I contributed well.
Absolutely.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I think, we've toyed with the idea of doing a swamp, like bringing back swamp studies as a bonus to like talk about the movie. And
Alan Moore himself is never a bad thing. So I'm good with that.
Yeah. I'd like to do more movie, not necessarily in Grawlix Prime, as Jesse would say, but I'd like to do more movie talk. That'd be great. And horror movies is something that's, we can always talk about horror movies.
Amen.
Like Grawlix Drive-Thru or Grawlix Nights Drive-Thru.
Yeah.
Grawlix by Night.
Grawlix by Night. Yeah. Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
Oh, and Swamp Thing. We should definitely watch Swamp Thing sometime.
When there's two of them that can.
And you've got those Mimiverse movies.
Oh yeah, that should happen.
All right. Well, we'll have to. we'll have to coordinate sometime. We can come up and have a movie night of sorts if you wish, and
Yep.
then do some movie talk. Yeah, that got way more conversational than I had intended for the podcast. Yeah, guys. So I'm going to come to your house next Thursday.
I'm bringing nachos.
This is why I must edit these things.
Oh, what, the technical difficulties aside, what? What?
Oh, yeah, that was rough, man. I'm glad.
I'm sorry. My theory was that with new internet and new microphones and new everything, there would be no problems.
Well,
And I know better.
I think
I blame Thor.
I think you're.
Who doesn't blame Thor?
Thor.
It's him.
I bet
Fancy monogram tunics.
I bet he's got perfect internet and perfect MacBook. And,
You know he does. Milner isn't just for lightning anymore, kids.
And perfect hair too.
yeah. Yeah.
As Melanie would say, blonde.
Blonde.
Yeah,
Blonde.
nothing more evil than that.
I really don't think she likes blondes either.
We kind of picked that up on this.
Well, I mean, this isn't the first time she's mentioned it.
It was a Thor spot for her. Whoop, whoop.
Well, yes, thank you, Dave. Definitely appreciate it. I've been excited
Thank
to
you.
have you on the show.
We've been wanting to have you on for a while,
Mhm.
and it just never worked. And
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes.
This is fun.
Hey kids, Randy here, checking in one last time before the end of the show to let you know that after this episode ended, we actually recorded about another 10 minutes of what was probably the funniest stuff in the whole episode. Instead of trying to find a nice place to splice that back in, I figured I'd throw it up on the YouTube channel as like bonus content, supplemental. So you should definitely go to youtube.com/Grawlix Podcast and check that out. And since I'm here, I also should remind you, send us some email. We'd like to start reading listener mail on the show. Letters, that's Letters, letters at grawlixpodcast.com. This has been Randy. There are two types of people in this world, those who like Grawlix and those who don't.
This is Jesse. Grawlix him, Grawlix him, Grawlix him. You're cool. Grawlix him.
This is Melanie. And, gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the Grawlix room.
This is Dave in honor of my son. Get to the Grawlix!
Thank you for listening to the Grawlix Podcast. The Grawlix Podcast is a production of Electronic Media Collective and Vorpal Arrow Studios. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. To hear more, visit grawlixpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/grawlixpodcast and like us on Twitter, twitter.com/grawlixpodcast.
I like how we're location B. It makes me feel like I keep thinking of like a 1980s G.I. Joe like Cobra bunker we're in.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Like we're, because everything was underground for Cobra.
Yeah.
Like this area is going to twist up out of the soil and have like giant serpents sticking out of it.
Except for Cobra Law, which apparently is impossible to find, but...
Unless you
like
stumble upon it.
It's like its own country.
Yeah, but no one's searing anything to their face in Cobra Law.
True.
Yeah, so
They
they've
just
got
wear-
their stuff together. And they're all state graduates.
And they just wear, like, polished chrome helmets.
So is that where Spider-Man, did he go to?
He went to Empire U.
He went to Empire U. Okay. And then, and I'm thinking of like, when you guys were talking about Latveria, I was thinking of Wakanda with T'Challa. And I'm like wondering, is he in like homeroom with like Doom and Reed or like getting mad at each other in science class?
yeah.
T'Challa's like, I ain't searing nothing.
And he went to his Black Panther meeting.
Yeah.
'Cause, whoa.
Zing.
It's all about race.
Really happy guy there. He's like, hey, what are you doing? You love all. It is really hard not like playing with things in
I'm
here right
sorry.
now. This is like
if I
the
had
room
known-
of wonders.
Yeah, if I had known we were recording in the office, I might have picked up a
There
little
are
bit.
all
It's like,
manner of just fun things here. I'm like, I
It's like
just want to pick
everything.
up everything and look
what
at
is
it.
this? Yeah, I've got a dragon with a letter opener.
We've got a
sword.
fire starter here. We are set.
I got it.
We're good.
Oh my God.
Coffee mug.
And I think
Sorry.
I have the after credits clip to play.
Kiefer's Office of Wonders.
Map to Cobra Law.
A map to Cobra Law. It's like needful things up in this.
I was once a podcaster.